Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Aditya here. Today we are diving into the AWS API Gateway WebSocket API, which enables two-way interactive communication between clients and servers. Okay, and this technology powers real-time applications like chat, apps, games, and more. Let's see how WebSocket API works, its integration with AWS, and its practical use cases. And just a disclaimer, this is just a overview. We are not diving deep here. This is a theory section, explain about WebSocket API at high level. We have already covered RESTful APIs using the Web AWS API Gateway, and we are good with it. And most of the times we will use it. But if you are building some real-time applications, WebSocket API will be useful. And if you guys are exploring the WebSocket API. If you need in-depth knowledge on a WebSocket API, comment in the comment box. I will make an detailed video on WebSocket API. As of now, this is a overview. Okay, so first we'll start with the question: what is WebSocket? WebSocket is right, which creates a continuous interactive communication between a client, for example, a browser, right? Usually client means we will see browsers and a server. But unlike HTTP, which only lets the client request data from the server, WebSockets lets the server push back to the client. Okay, so here the key feature is the server can push updates to the client and it will maintain an open connection. Obviously, right? How can a server push back to the client? Only by establishing an continuous connection. By using that or by maintaining that continuous connection only, we can the server can able to push back requests to the client. Usually in HTTP, you will push request to the server. The client will push request to the server. But in WebSocket, even the server can push request to the client. So that is a two-way interactive communication. And this feature makes WebSocket a fantastic choice for real-time applications like chat applications, multiplayer games, or financial trading applications where users needs update instantly. So for example, if you see the PUBG or WhatsApp or any streaming applications, and even when you use the Grow app where you can see the financial trading, right? Where you can see immediately your changes are appearing. For example, if you place a trade, whether you are getting profit or whether you are getting loss, it will be immediately shown right in real time. In the similar way, when you post a message to your friend in a WhatsApp, you can immediately see the message and you can push back your message to the your friend by using this real time communication protocol called WebSockets. Okay, we'll see how WebSocket works with AWS. So WebSocket in API Gateway works smoothly with AWS services like Lambda and DynamoDB. And these services handle the backend processing and data management needed for the WebSocket applications so that these will enable responsive and interactive experience for the end users. Okay, so definitely we have so many benefits here. Usually these WebSocket APIs are ideal for stateful applications because HTTPS is a stateless application where you are not going to store anything, but here you are persisting the connection and you need to use that connection to get the messages from the client and push back messages to the server, right? Because there is an ongoing interaction is happening between the client and the server. So that's how WebSocket will work. And in AWS, it will uses some other AWS services like Lambda and DynamoDB. Maybe you can use Lambda for processing your messages and store in the DynamoDB and send back response based on your processing, right? You can do that. And now we'll see a flow diagram where how this interaction will happen. For example, you have a chat application, maybe your WhatsApp, where you will hit the WebSocket API. So when you open your chat application, automatically you will hit that WebSocket API. And the WebSocket API, what it will do is it will persist the connection. So it will get the request from you immediately, and it will persist the connection for the future use. So from now onwards, it's not going to wait for another request. It will take the same connection ID until and unless you cancel it. Okay, so once the WebSocket API get the connection initially, what it will do is it will call one backend lambda. In AWS, we'll use lambda as backend, right? For example, you are using lambda. So this onConnect lambda, what onConnect lambda will do is it will take that connection information and persist in a data store. For example, here we are storing inside an Amazon DynamoDB. So once you have the connection ID persist here, right, you can use the same connection ID to push back the requests or responses to the client also. Server also communicates with the client in real time. But here in this example, for example, once you connected, right, now you are sending back, you are sending some messages to your friend, for example, like this. And here for processing your messages, you have one more lambda, right? And you are sending messages, and those messages will be stored in the DynamoDB. And finally, you close your chat app or your WhatsApp messenger. Then what will happen is your WebSocket API will call one more lambda, that is on disconnect. Once you disconnect, it will execute this lambda and remove that connection ID maybe. So this is how the real-time communication will be happen, right? Here I didn't shown the server side. I've only shown how the client will request, but the server also push back the responses or requests or messages. For example, on the server, for your friend will push back the responses or push back the messages, or he can send back the messages to you, right? So this is how the flow will work while connecting. Now we'll see in a deeper way, right? Connecting to the WebSocket API, right? So to start a WebSocket connection, now you have seen already flow where client will send an WebSocket API request, right? But how they will do? They will use this kind of URL. So once you create a WebSocket API in AWS API Gateway, it will give you this URL where you will have extension like WSS, where HTTP has HTTPS, and here we have WSS. So WSS column double slash, and you will have some unique ID dot execute hyphen API dot region. So in which region you deploy your WebSocket API, that region information, and after that Amazon AWS.com slash your stage name. So this is how your WebSocket URL will look like. Okay. And when a client connects to an API gateway, right, where we will assign an unique connection ID, and this unique connection ID referred in the backend integrations like storing active connections in the DynamoDB. So if you see here, few steps will be there. So first client initiates a connection. Obviously, when you open your chat message, that's where the initiation will happen. Once the initiation happens, right, a unique connection ID will be created and stored for the tracking for the entire communication. And here, with respect to AWS, we will use some backend integrations like DynamoDB and Lambda, and those can access this connection ID and process your requests. And yeah, the similar example, right? If you have client and the client is hitting the WebSocket API, we will persist the connection by using the, maybe there is a lambda name called onConnect, which will take that connection ID and store it in the Amazon DynamoDB for the future two-way communications. And moving on to the next slide, that is client to server messaging. So we have already seen client to server so many times. So here, right, how the client will send a message to the server. That is simple. When the client sends a message, it goes through the API gateway, which forwards it to the appropriate AWS service. So for example, if you open your chart application, and immediately the persistent connection will go to the API gateway, that WebSocket API, and WebSocket API will create a connection ID, and that connection ID will be persisted in some other AWS service like DynamoDB. And we will use the same connection ID throughout. So both the server and the client know exactly where the message is going. Okay. For example, the same example, a chat message might go to a Lambda function, and that Lambda function logs it into a database and send it back out of the other users in the same chat room. For example, it's an um, group chat, right? For example, it's a group chat. If I send a message, and this message will send to all the other users. in the server, right? Connected to that particular chart room. So that will happen. And yeah, this is the slide which is showing the message flow and AWS integration. And the messages are routed through the API gateway using the WebSocket URL. Definitely, we have to use that WebSocket URL. And then these messages can be processed by the Lambda and stored in a DynamoDB and sent to the chart room, and where users can interact and they can send back messages to me. So that two-way communication will happen like that. Now, server to client messaging. Messages can also go the other way also, right? Until now, we have seen only the client sending messages. We have seen so many flows. But how the server will send messages to the client? So messages can also go the other way also, right? We have AWS services like Lambda, right? They can send a message to a specific client using the WebSocket URL along with the connection ID. Since the initiator will initiate that connection ID, we will use that connection ID and will respond. The server will respond back to that connection ID. This way, the server can push important updates directly to the specific clients in real time. So here you can see, you have a server-side code, for example, Lambda function, and which sends a message to a specific client using the WebSocket connection URL. Since we have this WebSocket connection URL, we will use that. And since Amazon API, right, since we are using the AWS API Gateway, you have to follow this standard where you have to sign your message by using the IAM SIG-v4 signature. But yeah, this is with respect to AWS, but with respect to server to client messaging, the backend service will do some processing. It send response back to a specific client by using the connection ID. Okay, for example, if you see, the WebSocket connection URL will look like this. This is similar to the previous URL, but the difference is you have this @connection / connection ID, so that you can send the response back to a specific user only. Okay. So this is how the pushback will happen. So this is the important part where the two-way communications will happen. The initial part, client initiation, he sends some message and the message will be persist and sent to the chat room. And now one of the user responded to that message, and this message will directly go back to the particular connection ID's user, right, in a real-time fashion. Now this connection URL, right? What of the connection URL you've seen, you will have few operations available on this connection URL. We'll see that. This API gateway offers several operations on the connection URL. So this is the connection URL if you see. And these operations allowing servers to manage the connection status. So this connection status can be managed by using few operations which are provided to this URL. And we'll see what are those operations. Okay, the first one is the post method, where a server can send messages. So the post method is very important. The server can send back messages to the clients. And we have a get method which checks the connection status. Whether the connection is alive or not, it will check. And finally, you have a delete operation where you can disconnect from a client, right? You can disconnect that client from the server. So these are the operations will be used for the connection URL. And moving on to the next slide, which is routing. So API Gateway also supports message routing. Okay. And how can we achieve that? By setting a route selection expression. So you will have an JSON expression like this. For example, $request dot body dot action. So any incoming messages, right, can be directed to a specific routes based on the action defined in the message. Here, if you see in the message, right, we have an action called, we will have an action, right? So based on this action, you can route. So if there is no action specified, you can simply route to a default route, right? But if you have specified any actions like $request dot body dot action, if the action having some value, then we will route to that action. And if you don't have any actions, then it will go to a default route. Okay. For example, a JSON payload. If you see this JSON payload, you will have an action called join, and one more information called data. So to which chart room you want to join, that room information. Since you have an action here, request.body.action, since your request has action, right? If the route key matches with action, for example, if you have a route key with matching name action, then you can directly go and join into that specific chat room. And if you don't have that matching action, then you won't be able to join to the chat room. Okay, so that is how the routing will works in WebSocket API at the very high level. Okay, and moving on to the next slide, that is use case. Important use case is chart applications. So now let's look at a practical example. Imagine a chart application where users can join or leave rooms and messages and shares instantly with everyone in the same room. So if he messages, everyone will be see the message, and everyone can react to it, and instantly they can reply back it. So where you can use API gateway and services like DynamoDB, which can maintain a list of connections, route messages to specific rooms, and deliver real-time updates to everyone involved. Obviously, right? So you can use this AWS API gateway and enable and create WebSocket API, and you can create your own chart applications so that you will have application flows like users can connect, send messages, and receive messages in real time. And how they can achieve, they can use some backend integrations like DynamoDB, Lambda, right, where they can manage the messages in the DynamoDB and process those messages, or whenever so we get back the responses from the others, we can show those responses based on the connections we stored in the DynamoDB. And finally, the conclusion is WebSocket in API Gateway brings two-way interactive communication to AWS, and which is opening up a world of possibilities for real-time applications. So anytime if you want to create a real-time application where you need two-way interactions, the WebSocket APIs are the go-to. So from chart apps to collaborative tools, and WebSocket is the go-to choice for applications that need constant real-time data flow between the server and client. Obviously, right? If you want the two-way communication, if you want the server and client communication should be happened simultaneously, then you have to you have only one go-to choice, that is WebSocket API. And right, this enables real-time two-way communication for responsive applications, for example your charts, chart applications, games, multiplayer game applications, and financial trading applications you can use. And it will easily integrate with AWS services like Lambda, DynamoDB, so that it will provide robust backend capabilities, obviously. And also this is perfect for applications which requires persistent client server communications. Okay, so thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more AWS insights.